Picture this: Christmas Eve, snow falling outside. A pregnant woman sits at a table surrounded by her husband's family. She has spent 3 days cooking, 3 days trying to be perfect. Then her husband stands up during dessert and announces he has filed for divorce. But wait, it gets worse. The doorbell rings. His mistress walks in wearing the red dress this pregnant wife could never afford. The mother-in-law smiles. Then she hands the pregnant wife a garbage bag. For your things, dear. The suitcases are designer. They stay with the family. She walks out into the snow. 7 months pregnant. No money, no phone, no friends. She nearly dies from hypothermia that night. But here is what her husband does not know. Here is what his cruel mother does not know. The quiet woman they just threw away like garbage. She used to audit companies worth $500 million. She could spot fraud in a spreadsheet faster than most people could spot a typo. And what she discovers about her husband's family? Murder, money laundering, a criminal empire built on destroyed lives. They thought they were discarding a powerless nobody. They had no idea they just created their worst nightmare. Stay with me until the end, because what happens at that charity gala in front of 500 witnesses? You will never see it coming. Lesson and value statement. This is not just a story about revenge. This is a story about knowing your worth when everyone around you says you have none. It is about building strength in silence, about understanding that patience is not weakness. Patience is preparation. If you have ever been underestimated, dismissed, or thrown away by people who should have loved you, this story is for you. If you have ever wondered whether the people who hurt you will ever face consequences, this story will give you hope. And if you are going through something difficult right now, something that feels impossible to survive, Rachel's journey will remind you of one truth. The darkest moments are often the beginning of your greatest transformation. Meaning of the story. Remember this: the people who hand you a garbage bag are not defining your worth. They are revealing their character. And sometimes rock bottom is not the end of your story. It is the foundation for everything you are about to build. Picture this: Christmas Eve, snow falling outside. A pregnant woman sits at a table, surrounded by her husband's family, desperately hoping that this year they will finally accept her. She has spent 3 days cooking, 3 days preparing, 3 days telling herself that if she just tries hard enough, they will love her. Then her husband stands up during dessert and announces he has filed for divorce. But wait, it gets worse. The doorbell rings. His mistress walks in wearing the red dress the pregnant wife could never afford. The mother-in-law takes the wife's plate of food and hands it to the mistress. Then she hands the pregnant wife a garbage bag for her belongings. Because the Ramoa suitcases, those belong to the family. She walks out into the snow with nothing: no money, no phone, no friends. Her husband has already destroyed her reputation with lies. She nearly dies from hypothermia in a laundromat parking lot. But here is what her husband does not know. Here is what his cruel mother does not know. The quiet woman they just threw away like garbage. She used to audit companies worth $500 million. She could spot fraud in a spreadsheet faster than most people could spot a typo. They thought they were discarding a powerless nobody. They had no idea they just created their worst nightmare. This is the story of Rachel Morgan, a woman who gave up everything for love, only to discover that love had been a trap all along. A woman who lost her career, her identity, her dignity, and nearly her life. And then she got it all back. Stay with me until the end, because what happens at that investor gala? You will never see it coming. 3 days before Christmas, Rachel Morgan stood in the kitchen of the Whitmore mansion, her swollen feet aching against the cold, marble floor. She was 7 months pregnant Her back hurt. Her ankles had disappeared sometime around Thanksgiving, and she had been cooking for 3 straight days. The turkey was brining in the basement refrigerator. 4 different pies cooled on the counter. She had made her grandmother's stuffing recipe from scratch, hand-torn bread, and all. Everything had to be perfect. It was never perfect enough. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Marcus, her older brother, she answered while checking the temperature on the cranberry sauce. "Please tell me you are not still cooking," Marcus said. "I am almost done." "Rachel, it is 11 at night. You have been in that kitchen since 6 in the morning." His voice carried the particular exhaustion of a man who had been having this same conversation for 3 years. They are not going to suddenly love you because your pie crust is flaky. These people think ketchup is spicy. Rachel laughed despite herself. They are my family now. No, sis. Family does not make you audition for 3 years. Family just shows up. There was a pause. "You still have that savings account I helped you open? The one Jonathan does not know about?" Rachel stirred the cranberry sauce slowly. "It only has $2,000. That is 2,000 more than zero. Never let anyone control all your money. That is not love. That is leverage." The kitchen door swung open. Rachel's mother-in-law stood in the doorway, her silver hair perfectly styled even at this late hour, her silk robe probably worth more than Rachel's entire wardrobe. Diane Whitmore surveyed the kitchen with the expression of a health inspector finding a roach. "You are still here. I wanted to make sure everything was ready for tomorrow," Rachel said, quickly ending the call with Marcus. "The turkey needs to—" "I know how to prepare a turkey. I have been hosting Christmas dinner since before you were born." Rachel nodded, swallowing the words she wanted to say. "Of course, I just thought—" "That is your problem, Rachel. You think too much about the wrong things and not enough about the right ones." Diane walked to the counter, examining each dish with barely concealed disdain. She picked up a dinner roll, squeezed it, and set it back down. "Store-bought would have been better." "I made them from scratch," Rachel said quietly. "My grandmother's recipe." Diane's smile did not reach her eyes. Some recipes should stay in certain kitchens. She turned and walked out without another word. Rachel stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of 3 days of labor, and felt the familiar burn of tears she refused to let fall. This was her life now. 3 years ago, she had been a forensic accountant at one of the top firms in Chicago. She had a corner office, a team of analysts, a reputation for finding fraud that others missed. Companies paid her $200 an hour to examine their books, and she was worth every penny. Then she met Jonathan Whitmore at a charity gala. He was handsome and charming, and seemed genuinely interested in her work. He asked questions about forensic accounting that no one at parties ever asked. He remembered details she mentioned. He made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced. 6 months later, they were engaged. A year after that, they were married. And slowly, piece by piece, Rachel's old life disappeared. First, it was the late nights at the office. Jonathan worried about her stress levels. Surely she did not need to work so hard now that they were married. Then, it was the business trips. He missed her when she traveled. Couldn't she take on clients closer to home? Then, it was the job itself. Why did she need to work at all? He made plenty of money. Wouldn't she rather focus on starting a family? Rachel had given up her career because she loved him, because she believed marriage meant compromise, because his mother said a real wife supported her husband instead of competing with him. Now she stood in a kitchen at midnight, making food that would never be good enough, waiting for approval that would never come. She finished the cranberry sauce and turned off the stove. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, she would prove that she belonged in this family. Tomorrow, everything would change. She was right about that, though not in the way she hoped. The Whitmore mansion glittered with Christmas decorations that cost more than Rachel's childhood home. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across a dining table set with china that had been in the family for 4 generations. The tree in the corner touched the 14-foot ceiling, decorated with ornaments that each had their own insurance policy. Rachel had spent the morning arranging flowers, polishing silver that already gleamed, making sure every detail met Diane's exacting standards. She wore a modest navy dress, conservative and elegant, exactly the kind of thing her mother-in-law might approve of. 14 guests filled the dining room. Jonathan's sister Catherine with her plastic surgeon husband, his brother David with his trophy wife, business associates, family friends, people who mattered in the complicated social hierarchy of old money. Rachel served the meal she had spent 3 days preparing. She smiled at the right moments. She laughed at jokes that were not funny. She played the role of the perfect wife with the precision of an actress who knew her career depended on every performance. Diane took one bite of the turkey, then she pushed her plate away. Dry. But I suppose that is what happens when you marry someone who learned to cook from a microwave. The words landed like a slap. Around the table, Catherine smirked into her wine glass. David coughed to hide a laugh. And Jonathan, Rachel's husband of 3 years, said nothing at all. Rachel felt her face flush but kept her voice steady. I brined it for 24 hours. The thermometer said. Diane's smile sharpened. Are you arguing with me? At my table? In front of my guests? No, I just... Perhaps the hormones are affecting your judgment. Diane gestured at Rachel's pregnant belly. You have been so emotional lately. Rachel noticed Jonathan texting under the table, smiling at something on his screen. She told herself it was work. She had been telling herself a lot of things lately. The meal continued in a rhythm of small cruelties. Catherine commented on Rachel's weight gain, suggesting it was excessive even for pregnancy. David made jokes about people who married above their station. A business associate asked Jonathan how he and his lovely wife met, and Diane answered before Rachel could speak. She was serving canapés at one of my charity events. We thought she was part of the catering staff. Everyone laughed. Rachel's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. Halfway through dessert, Jonathan stood up. I have an announcement to make. The table fell silent. Rachel looked up at her husband, expecting perhaps news about a business deal or a vacation plan. His face showed no emotion, no warmth, nothing that suggested what was coming. I have filed for divorce, Jonathan said calmly. The papers were submitted last week. Rachel will be leaving tonight. The words did not make sense at first. Rachel heard them, but they seemed to belong to someone else's life, someone else's nightmare. She sat frozen, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth, her mind struggling to process the impossible. Jonathan, she whispered, what are you talking about? He still was not looking at her. His gaze was fixed somewhere over her shoulder, his voice as steady as if he were discussing the weather. Our marriage is not working, Rachel. I think we both know that. You never fit in with this family. You embarrass me at social events. You cannot even cook a proper meal. Rachel's hand moved instinctively to her belly, to the baby growing inside her. I am 7 months pregnant with your child. The prenup ensures you receive nothing, Jonathan continued, as if she had not spoken. My lawyers have already reviewed everything. This will be clean and simple. The doorbell rang. Diane's face transformed into something Rachel had never seen before, a smile of genuine warmth and welcome. That will be her now, her. Jonathan walked to the foyer. Rachel heard voices, a woman's bright laughter, the sound of a coat being removed. Then they appeared in the doorway, and something inside Rachel cracked and shattered. The woman was young and polished, her blonde hair styled perfectly, her red dress elegant and expensive. It was the same red dress Rachel had saved for. the one she could not afford because Jonathan controlled all the finances. The woman moved with the confidence of someone who had never been made to feel small. Jonathan's hand rested possessively on her lower back. "Everyone, this is Chelsea, my fiancé. Fiancé. Not girlfriend, fiancé." Which meant this had been going on for months, planned and executed, while Rachel slept beside him, carried his child, tried desperately to earn his family's acceptance. Chelsea smiled at the table. "It is wonderful to finally meet everyone properly. Jonathan has told me so much about his family." She glanced at Rachel, her expression friendly and completely unbothered. "You must be Rachel. Jonathan mentioned you would be here tonight." What an awkward situation, but I suppose it is better to be direct about these things. Diane stood immediately, embracing Chelsea with genuine warmth. "We are so delighted Jonathan has finally found someone suitable. Please sit here." She gestured to Rachel's chair, the chair Rachel was still sitting in. "I am still sitting here," Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan's expression hardened. "Then stand up, Rachel. You are leaving anyway. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." Rachel rose slowly, her legs shaking, her hand pressed against the table for balance. She looked at Richard, really looked at him, searching for any trace of the man she had married, the man who had promised to love her. She found nothing but cold calculation. "What about the baby?" Rachel whispered. "What about our daughter?" Jonathan's jaw tightened. "We will discuss custody arrangements through lawyers. I will provide financial support as required by law. But this child does not change anything between us." Chelsea touched Jonathan's arm gently. "I am sure we can all be reasonable about this. Children need stability, and Jonathan will certainly be a wonderful father." Diane appeared beside Rachel holding something out, a garbage bag. "For your things, dear. The suitcases are Ramoa. They stay with the family." Rachel took the bag. Her hands were shaking, but she did not cry. She would not give them that satisfaction. She walked toward the foyer, each step taking her further from everything she had known. Her coat hung near the door, the navy wool she had worn arriving at this dinner, what felt like years ago instead of hours. The front door was heavy oak, the handle cold against her palm. She pulled it open, and December air rushed in, sharp and biting. Jonathan had taken her phone. He had canceled her credit cards. She had nothing but the clothes on her back and a garbage bag containing whatever she had managed to grab in the few minutes they allowed her. Rachel stepped out into the snow. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything. The snow fell harder as Rachel walked away from the Whitmore mansion. She had no destination, no plan, no resources. Jonathan had systematically cut her off from everything during their marriage, isolating her from friends, controlling the finances, making her dependent on his approval for every aspect of her life. She had not seen it happening because she had wanted so desperately to believe in the fairy tale. Poor girl meets wealthy prince. Prince saves her from ordinary life. They live happily ever after. The fairy tale had been a trap. Rachel walked for what felt like hours, her thin coat doing nothing against the bitter cold. Her feet ached. Her belly felt heavy. The baby kicked frantically, as if sensing something was wrong. She found a motel 3 miles from the Whitmore mansion, a rundown place with a flickering neon sign and a clerk who looked like he had seen better decades. Rachel approached the counter with the single credit card Jonathan had allowed her to carry, the one for emergencies. "I need a room for the night." The clerk ran the card. Then he ran it again. Then he shook his head. "Declined. You got another form of payment?" Rachel stared at him. Jonathan had canceled the card. Of course he had. He had planned every detail of her destruction with the same precision he applied to his business deals. I do not have anything else. The clerk shrugged. Cannot help you then. There is a shelter on 5th Street, opens at 9. Rachel walked back into the cold. The temperature was dropping, and she could feel her body starting to shake. The kind of shaking that came before hypothermia. She needed help. She needed someone to call. Her best friend, Megan. They had known each other since college, before Rachel had met Jonathan, before everything changed. Megan would help. Megan would understand. Rachel found a payphone outside a gas station, the kind she did not know still existed, and used the handful of coins in her coat pocket to make the call. A man answered. Megan's husband, Tom. Tom, it is Rachel. I need to speak with Megan. It is an emergency. There was a long pause. Then Tom's voice came through cold and final. Jonathan called us tonight. He told us everything. How you cheated on him, how you have been unstable, how you have been lying about being pregnant to trap him. Megan does not want to talk to you. Do not call this number again. The line went dead. Rachel stood in the phone booth, the receiver still pressed to her ear, listening to the dial tone as her last hope evaporated. Jonathan's smear campaign had already begun. He was not just divorcing her. He was erasing her, rewriting the story so that she became the villain and he became the victim. She left the phone booth and kept walking. She did not know where she was going anymore. The cold had seeped into her bones, and her thoughts were becoming fuzzy, disconnected. She just needed to rest for a moment, just needed to sit down and close her eyes. She found herself in the parking lot of a 24-hour laundromat, partially sheltered from the wind by an overhanging roof. The lights inside were bright, warm, inviting. But Rachel's legs would not carry her any further. She lowered herself to the ground, her back against the brick wall, her arms wrapped around her belly. The baby was moving frantically now, as if sensing that something was terribly wrong. Then the pain hit. Sharp, sudden, terrifying. Contractions, too early, much too early. Rachel tried to stand, but her legs would not cooperate. The world was spinning, darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision. This cannot be happening. Not now. Not like this. She thought about her mother, who had died 2 years ago. She thought about all the dreams she had for her daughter, the life she had imagined giving her. She thought about how unfair it was to survive so much only to die in a parking lot, forgotten and alone. Then everything went black. She woke to warmth. Someone had wrapped a coat around her, a heavy wool peacoat that smelled like lavender and fabric softener. She was no longer on the cold ground, but inside the laundromat, lying on a makeshift bed of clean towels. An elderly black woman's face appeared in her vision. Mid-60s, kind eyes, behind wire-rimmed glasses, silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Hey, you are awake. Thank God. The woman's voice was calm but concerned. I found you outside. You were barely breathing. There is an ambulance on the way. Rachel tried to speak, but her voice would not come. Do not try to talk. Just breathe. The woman took Rachel's hand. My name is Dorothy. I own this place. Been running it for 35 years. Seen a lot of people walk through those doors at their worst moment. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Paramedics loaded Rachel onto a stretcher, checking vital signs, asking questions she could barely answer. Dorothy stayed with her the whole time. Do you have family we can call? One of the paramedics asked. Rachel thought about Jonathan, about Diane, about the friends who had abandoned her. No, she whispered. I do not have anyone. Dorothy squeezed her hand. That is not true. You have got me for right now. We will figure out the rest later. The hospital was a blur of bright lights and urgent voices. Rachel was rushed into a room, monitors attached, doctors appearing and disappearing with concerned expressions. The contractions had stopped, but they needed to run tests, needed to make sure the baby was not in distress. 6 hours later, A doctor told her what she already knew. You were experiencing stress-induced early labor. The baby is stable now, but you need rest, warmth, and minimal stress for the remainder of your pregnancy. Continued exposure to those conditions could have been fatal for both of you. Rachel lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. She had lost everything: her husband, her home, her friends, her money, her identity. She had nearly lost her life and her daughter's life, and she had no idea what to do next. A nurse appeared in the doorway. "There's a woman here to see you. Says her name is Dorothy." Rachel nodded, and Dorothy walked in, carrying a bag from the hospital cafeteria. "Brought you some food. That hospital junk they serve will not do you or that baby any good." She sat down beside Rachel's bed and handed her a container of soup. "Now," Dorothy said, her voice gentle but firm, "you want to tell me how a pregnant woman ended up half frozen in my parking lot on Christmas Eve?" Rachel looked at this stranger who had saved her life, and something inside her broke open. She told Dorothy everything: the Christmas dinner, the garbage bag, the humiliation in front of 14 people, the mistress in the red dress, the canceled credit cards, and the disconnected phone, and the friends who would not take her call. Dorothy listened without interrupting. When Rachel finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Let me guess," Dorothy finally said. "Christmas present from the in-laws?" Rachel tried to laugh, but started crying instead. Dorothy leaned forward. "I am going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it. What happened to you tonight is not your fault. You did not fail at being a wife. They failed at being human beings." Rachel wiped her eyes. "I should have seen it coming. I was a forensic accountant. I used to catch people hiding things for a living. How did I miss what was happening in my own marriage?" "Because love makes us blind," Dorothy said simply. "And because predators are good at hiding what they are. That is not your weakness. That is their evil." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the snow still falling outside. "You know what I have learned in 35 years of running that laundromat?" Dorothy asked. "I have seen people at their worst. Middle of the night, nowhere to go, everything falling apart. And the ones who survive are not the ones who had the most resources. They are the ones who refuse to give up." She turned back to Rachel. "Tomorrow is Christmas Day. The day after that, we start figuring out your next step. That is how survival works, one step at a time." Rachel looked at this woman she had known for less than 12 hours, who had saved her life, who was now offering her guidance and hope. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You do not even know me." Dorothy smiled. "Because someone helped me once, a long time ago, and the only way to repay that kind of debt is to pass it along." She pulled a card from her pocket and handed it to Rachel. "My niece works at the courthouse, family law specialist. When you get out of here, you call that number. First consultation is free." Rachel looked at the card. Betty Kowalski, it said. "Attorney at law, specializing in family court." "There is one more thing," Dorothy said. "You mentioned you were a forensic accountant. That means you know how to find things people want to hide." Rachel nodded slowly. "Then maybe it is time to stop hiding yourself," Dorothy said, "and start looking for the truth about the people who hurt you. Because something tells me they have secrets too." Rachel thought about Jonathan's late nights at the office, about Diane's mysterious business dealings, about all the questions she had pushed aside because a good wife did not ask too many questions. Maybe Dorothy was right. Maybe it was time to start asking. Marcus Hayes showed up at the hospital on Christmas morning with coffee, bagels, and the expression that said someone was about to get hurt. "Tell me everything," he said, pulling a chair up to Rachel's bed. "And I mean everything. Who do I need to have a conversation with? Rachel had called her brother from the hospital phone the night before. It was the first time she had spoken to him since Thanksgiving. When Jonathan had informed her that Marcus was not welcome at their family gatherings. Too blue-collar, Jonathan had said. He makes my mother uncomfortable. Rachel had accepted it, like she had accepted everything else. Now Marcus was here, the one person who had never stopped being in her corner. It is not that simple, Rachel said. They have lawyers, they have money, they have connections. If you go after them, they will destroy you too. Let them try. Marcus set down his coffee with more force than necessary. What kind of man throws out his pregnant wife on Christmas Eve? What kind of family helps him do it? The kind with $200 million and no conscience. Marcus went quiet at that number. He was a construction foreman, made good money, but $200 million was a different universe. Okay, he said finally, so we cannot fight them head on. What can we do? Rachel thought about what Dorothy had said, about finding the truth, about asking questions. I was a forensic accountant for 8 years, Rachel said slowly. I used to find fraud that the FBI could not find. I know how to follow money trails, how to spot shell companies, how to find the things people bury in their books. Marcus leaned forward. You think they're hiding something? I know they're hiding something. Rachel's mind was starting to work in ways it had not worked in 3 years. During our marriage, I saw things. Documents that did not add up. Cash payments without receipts. Property deals that happened too fast. I pushed those thoughts away because I was trying to be a good wife. And now? Now I have nothing left to lose. Marcus grinned, and for the first time since Christmas Eve, Rachel felt something like hope. That is my sister talking, he said. So, what is the first step? Rachel looked at the card Dorothy had given her. Betty Kowalski. We need a lawyer, Rachel said. Someone who knows family court. Someone who can protect me and the baby while I figure out what the Whitmores are really doing with their money. 3 days later, Rachel sat in Betty Kowalski's office. Betty was 67 years old, with silver hair and sharp eyes that suggested she had seen every dirty trick in the book. Her office was cramped and cluttered, decorated with photographs of grandchildren and diplomas from law schools that had been good 50 years ago. She was also, Rachel learned, a retired family court judge. 30 years on the bench, Betty said, settling into her chair across from Rachel. Watched too many women like you get crushed by a system that favors whoever has the better lawyer. Retired last year, but I still take on cases that matter. Dorothy said you could help me. Dorothy is my godmother, practically raised me after my parents passed. She told me what happened to you. Betty's expression hardened. That family threw you out with a garbage bag? Rachel nodded. Then let me tell you what we are going to do. Betty pulled out a legal pad. First, we file for emergency spousal support. You are pregnant, you have no income, you have been financially dependent for 3 years. The court will require Jonathan to support you until the divorce is finalized. Can he fight that? He can try. But judges take a dim view of men who abandon pregnant wives, especially when those wives can demonstrate financial abuse. Rachel blinked. Financial abuse? When one spouse controls all the money, isolates the other from resources, cancels credit cards without warning, that is a form of domestic abuse, and the court recognizes it. Betty made a note. We will also file for temporary custody. You are the mother, you are stable, you are clearly capable of caring for a child. Rachel thought about the hospital bills she could not pay, the apartment she could not afford, the job she no longer had. I am not sure I qualify as stable right now. Betty looked at her, over the top of her glasses. You survived what would have broken most people. You are already making a plan that is stable enough for me. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal filings and court dates. Rachel moved into Marcus's small apartment in the suburbs. It was cramped, especially with Marcus's 8-year-old daughter, Lily, also living there, but it was warm and safe and free from judgment. Lily decided immediately that Rachel's baby would be her best friend. "Can the baby hear me if I talk to your tummy?" Lily asked one evening, her face pressed against Rachel's belly. "Doctors say yes." "Hi, baby," Lily whispered solemnly. "Your daddy is a butthead, but do not worry. Uncle Marcus says karma is real, and he is going to get what is coming." Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Lily, we talked about this. We do not say butthead." Lily looked up at him. "Then what do we say?" Marcus thought for a moment. "Morally deficient trash person." Rachel laughed so hard she nearly cried. Those moments of lightness were rare, but they kept her going, because the legal battle was brutal. Jonathan's lawyers were aggressive and well-funded. They filed motion after motion, challenged every document, delayed every hearing. They painted Rachel as unstable, ungrateful, a gold digger who had trapped their client with a pregnancy. But Betty was relentless. She countered every motion. She documented every instance of financial abuse. She found witnesses who had seen how Diane treated Rachel at family gatherings. And slowly, the tide began to turn. 6 weeks after Christmas Eve, Rachel stood in a family courtroom for the custody hearing. Jonathan was there with his team of lawyers. Diane sat in the gallery, watching with cold eyes. Chelsea was nowhere to be seen. The judge reviewed the evidence, the canceled credit cards, the isolation from friends and family, the Christmas Eve humiliation documented by Betty's investigator. "Based on the evidence presented," the judge said, "I am granting temporary custody to the mother. The father will have supervised visitation until the final custody determination." Rachel felt her knees go weak with relief. She had won, not the war, but a battle. Her daughter would stay with her. Outside the courthouse, Marcus was waiting. "See," he said, hugging her carefully, "justice is not dead. It is just really slow and needs a lot of paperwork. I actually won something. You won round one." Marcus's expression turned serious. "These people have money for appeals. Celebrate tonight, prepare tomorrow." Rachel nodded, but for that moment, she allowed herself to feel hope. That hope lasted exactly 2 weeks. The motion landed on Betty's desk on a Tuesday morning. Jonathan's lawyers had filed an emergency petition to reverse the custody ruling. Rachel sat in Betty's cramped office, reading the documents with growing horror. They were claiming she was mentally unstable, that she had a history of psychiatric problems, that she had made threats against Chelsea and Jonathan that suggested she was a danger to her own child. None of it was true, but they had evidence. Screenshots of text messages where Rachel allegedly threatened to kill herself if Jonathan left her. Medical records from a psychiatric hospital showing she had been treated for severe depression and psychotic episodes. A sworn statement from Chelsea describing how Rachel had appeared at her apartment, screaming threats and trying to break down the door. "I never sent those texts," Rachel said, her voice shaking. "Those medical records are fake. I have never been to that hospital in my life. I do not even know where Chelsea lives." Betty studied the documents with a frown. "They have dates, signatures, everything that looks legitimate on the surface, because they created them." Rachel's mind raced. "Someone forged these documents. Can you prove that?" Rachel thought about her forensic accounting training, about metadata and digital fingerprints and the traces that every electronic document leaves behind. Maybe. If I can get access to the original files, I can show when they were actually created versus when they claim to have been created. But before she could investigate, the court ruled. The judge was different this time, older, more conservative, with connections to the same social circles as the Whitmores. Given the serious concerns about the mother's mental stability, the judge said, Temporary custody is transferred to the father pending a full psychiatric evaluation. Rachel's lawyer objected. She demanded time to investigate the authenticity of the documents. She pointed out the suspicious timing, the lack of corroborating evidence. The judge was unmoved. The safety of the child is my primary concern. Until we can verify the mother's mental state, the child will remain with the father. Rachel gave birth to her daughter 3 weeks later. She named her Emma, after her mother. Emma was small but healthy, with dark hair and her grandmother's eyes. Rachel held her in the hospital room, counting tiny fingers and toes, marveling at this perfect creature she had created. For 72 hours, they were together. Rachel fed her and changed her and talked to her about all the things they would do when this nightmare was over. Then Jonathan arrived with a court order. The nurse tried to stop him. Security was called, but the paperwork was valid, signed by a judge, legal and binding. Jonathan took Emma from Rachel's arms. She screamed, she begged, she tried to physically stop him, and hospital security had to hold her back. "You cannot do this. She is my daughter. I am her mother." Jonathan looked at her with the same cold expression he had worn on Christmas Eve. "You are unstable, Rachel. Everyone can see it. This is for Emma's best interest." He walked out with her daughter. Rachel collapsed on the hospital floor. She did not move for 4 hours. Betty found her there, curled in the corner of the room, staring at nothing. The older woman sat down beside her, not speaking, just being present. Finally, Rachel's voice came out, hollow and broken. "He took my baby. I know. Those documents are forged. I never threatened anyone. I never went to that hospital. They created evidence to destroy me. I believe you." Rachel looked at Betty with empty eyes. "Then why did the judge take my daughter?" Betty was quiet for a moment. "Because the system is not designed for justice. It is designed for whoever has the most resources. The Whitmores have been playing this game for generations. They know which judges to approach, which lawyers to hire, which buttons to push. So I cannot win." "I did not say that." Betty's voice hardened. "I said the system favors them, but systems can be beaten if you understand how they work. You are a forensic accountant. You know how to find things people want to hide." Rachel thought about Emma, about the tiny fingers that had gripped hers, about the promises she had made. "I need to prove those documents are forged. That is a start." "But Rachel," Betty leaned forward, "something bigger is going on here. Normal families do not forge psychiatric records to win custody battles. This level of deception, this coordination, it suggests they are protecting something more than just Jonathan's reputation." "Like what?" "I do not know yet. But I have been doing this for 30 years, and my instincts are telling me that you stumbled into something dangerous. Whatever the Whitmores are hiding, they are willing to destroy you completely to keep it secret." Rachel thought about all the questions she had ignored during her marriage, the late-night phone calls, the mysterious business trips, the documents she had glimpsed that did not add up. "Then it is time to find out what they are hiding," Rachel said, "and use it to get my daughter back." Rachel turned Marcus's kitchen table into a command center. Documents spread across every surface: property records, business filings, tax documents, anything she could access through public records or freedom of information requests. Lily thought it was a treasure hunt. "What are you looking for, Auntie Rachel?" "The truth, honey. Is it hidden in all that paper?" Rachel looked at the mountain of documents in front of her. "It is hidden somewhere. I just have to find it." Marcus came home from work to find his apartment transformed into an investigation hub. "I was gone for 8 hours, he said, staring at the chaos. 8 hours, and you turned my dining room into beautiful mind." "I found something." Rachel pulled out a chart she had been constructing all day. Whitmore Holdings was the family's primary company, a real estate development firm worth over $200 million on paper. But the numbers did not add up. Look at this. Rachel pointed to a property transaction. They bought this land for $2 million in January. 2 months later, they sold it for $15 million to a company called Apex Ventures. Maybe land values went up? Rachel shook her head. I checked. There was no development on the property, no rezoning, nothing that would explain a 700% increase in value. And here's the interesting part. She pulled out another document. Apex Ventures is owned by a shell company in Delaware. That shell company is owned by another shell company in Nevada. But when you trace the ownership all the way back, Marcus leaned in. Let me guess. Diane Whitmore is listed as the beneficial owner. They sold property to themselves at massively inflated prices. What does that mean? It means they are laundering money. Rachel's voice was tight with controlled fury. Classic technique. You buy property with dirty cash, sell it at an inflated price to a company you control, and suddenly the money is clean because it came from a legitimate real estate transaction. So your in-laws are criminals. My in-laws are running a money laundering operation worth tens of millions of dollars. And I am guessing they threw me out so brutally because they were afraid I would figure it out. But you had not figured it out. You stopped working when you got married, Rachel nodded slowly. But I was starting to notice things, little details that did not add up. I think Diane saw me as a threat even before I was conscious of what I was seeing. She wanted me gone before I could put the pieces together. Okay, so we have evidence they are laundering money. What do we do with it? We take it to the FBI. The meeting with federal agents took 2 weeks to arrange. Rachel walked into the FBI field office, carrying a folder of documentation that had taken her months to compile. Shell companies, wire transfers, property transactions, every piece of evidence she had gathered, organized, and annotated with the precision of a forensic accountant. Agent DeLuca listened politely. He was middle-aged, tired-looking, with the expression of a man who had heard too many conspiracy theories. Mrs. Morgan, he said, when she finished, I understand you are going through a difficult divorce. These allegations are serious, but financial investigations take years. We would need much more than this to open a case. I can get more. Give me access to their actual financial records, and I will find everything. DeLuca shook his head. That is not how investigations work. We cannot open a case based on speculation from a disgruntled spouse. This is not speculation. These are documented transactions that show a clear pattern of... Say, I would advise you to focus on your custody battle. These kinds of accusations during divorce proceedings often look like revenge. Rachel stared at him. You are not going to do anything, are you? DeLuca stood, signaling the meeting was over. Thank you for coming in, Mrs. Morgan. Rachel walked out of the FBI building feeling the weight of despair settling back onto her shoulders. They had won again. They always won. She was halfway to her car when a voice stopped her. Mrs. Morgan? A woman approached. Latino, mid-40s, sharp eyes, practical haircut. She moved with the confident efficiency of someone who did not waste time. I am Detective Nina Flores. I work financial crimes for the state attorney's office. Rachel studied her warily. Did they send you to tell me to drop my investigation too? Nina's expression flickered with something like amusement. Agent DeLuca plays golf with Jonathan's uncle. He was never going to help you. Rachel felt a spark of interest. You know about the Whitmores? I have been investigating them for 4 years. Money laundering, tax fraud, possible connections to organized crime. You know what I have never had? What? An inside source. Someone who understands forensic accounting. Someone with personal motivation to see them brought down. Rachel studied this woman, looking for signs of deception and finding only exhaustion and determination. Why should I trust you? Because I have been where you are. Nina's voice hardened. 10 years ago, I was married to a man who looked perfect on paper. Rich family, respected business, all the right connections. Turned out he was laundering money for a drug cartel. When I started asking questions, his family tried to destroy me, the same way the Whitmores are trying to destroy you. What happened? I survived. I rebuilt. And now I spend my career taking down men like my ex-husband. Nina handed Rachel a card. Think about it. We could help each other. Rachel looked at the card, then at Nina. I do not need to think about it, she said. When do we start? 3 months of investigation changed everything. Rachel and Nina worked together, combining Rachel's forensic accounting skills with Nina's law enforcement resources. They traced shell companies across four states. They documented wire transfers that did not match legitimate business activities. They built a case that was meticulous, comprehensive, and devastating, but it was not enough. The Whitmores had protections, judges who owed them favors, politicians they had donated to, a network of influence built over decades. Every time Nina tried to advance the investigation, she hit a wall. My supervisor shut down the formal inquiry, Nina said during one of their late-night strategy sessions. Said there was not enough evidence to justify the resources. We have enough evidence to put them away for 20 years. We have enough evidence to make them uncomfortable. That is not the same thing when you are dealing with people this connected. Rachel stared at the documents spread across the table. Months of work, proof of crimes that had destroyed lives. And none of it mattered because the Whitmores had bought the system. There has to be something else, Rachel said. Something that would be too big to ignore. Nina was quiet for a moment. There is one thing, but it is dangerous. Tell me, Diane's husband died 12 years ago. Car accident on the highway. I know, Jonathan does not talk about his father much, because the official story is a lie. Nina pulled out a file she had never shown Rachel before. I have been looking into it for years. Richard Whitmore was about to go to the FBI with evidence of the money laundering. 2 weeks before his scheduled meeting, his car went off a bridge. Rachel felt her blood run cold. You think Diane killed him? I think the brake lines on his car were cut. I think the investigation was shut down by a coroner who owed the family favors. And I think Jonathan knows the truth and has been too scared of his mother to do anything about it. Rachel thought about her ex-husband, about the fear she had sometimes seen in his eyes when he looked at Diane. She had always assumed it was just dysfunctional family dynamics. Now she wondered if it was something much darker. If we can prove Diane murdered her husband, Rachel said slowly, that would be too big to cover up. It would. But the evidence has been buried for 12 years. I do not know how we could possibly... There is one person who might know, Rachel interrupted. One person who has been living inside that family, watching everything. Who? Chelsea. Nina stared at her. Your husband's mistress? The woman who helped destroy your life? Rachel nodded. Think about it. She has been with Jonathan for over a year. She lives in that house. She hears things. And right now, she thinks she is going to marry into a fortune. You want to turn her into an informant. I want to show her what she has actually gotten herself into. Rachel's voice was hard. Chelsea thinks she is the upgrade. She has no idea she is walking into a family that murders people who become inconvenient. The meeting with Chelsea happened 3 days later. Rachel chose a coffee shop in a neighborhood where neither of them would be recognized. She arrived early, ordered tea, and waited. Chelsea walked in exactly on time. She looked different than Rachel remembered. Thinner, nervous. The confident Instagram influencer from Christmas Eve had been replaced by someone who jumped at shadows. I almost did not come, Chelsea said, sliding into the booth across from Rachel. If Diane finds out I am meeting with you, she will not find out. Not if we are careful. Why did you want to see me? Chelsea's voice was suspicious. To gloat? To threaten me? Rachel shook her head. To warn you. Warn me about what? Rachel pulled out a document and slid it across the table. The prenup you signed when you married Jonathan. Did you read it all the way through? Chelsea glanced at the papers. My lawyer reviewed it. Did your lawyer explain Clause 47? Chelsea's expression flickered with uncertainty. What about it? It is buried in the fine print. Most people would never notice it. But it says that if Jonathan dies or is incarcerated for any reason, all assets transfer directly to Diane. Not to you, not to any children. Diane. Chelsea went pale. That cannot be right. Look for yourself. Chelsea read the clause, her hands trembling slightly. I do not understand. Why would Jonathan agree to something like this? Because Jonathan does whatever his mother tells him to do, Rachel said. He always has. And do you know why? Chelsea looked up, fear creeping into her eyes. Because 12 years ago, Diane murdered Jonathan's father. Richard Whitmore found out about the money laundering and was going to expose it. 2 weeks later, he was dead. Rachel leaned forward. Jonathan knows the truth. He has known for 12 years, and he is too terrified of his mother to do anything about it. Chelsea's face had gone completely white. You are lying. You are making this up to scare me. I am telling you the truth because you need to hear it. Rachel's voice was calm but intense. Diane does not keep people around who become problems. Her husband became a problem and she eliminated him. If you become inconvenient, if you threaten her control over Jonathan or her money, you will be eliminated too. Chelsea stood abruptly, knocking over her coffee cup. I need to go. Think about what I said. Rachel did not move. And ask yourself why Jonathan is so afraid of his mother, why he flinches when she raises her voice, why he goes along with everything she demands without question. Chelsea was already walking toward the door. Rachel called after her. When you are ready to talk, you know how to reach me. Chelsea did not respond. She pushed through the door and disappeared into the parking lot. But Rachel saw the fear in her eyes, the doubt. The first cracks in the foundation of lies the Whitmores had built around her. The seed was planted. Now she just had to wait. The call came 3 weeks later. Rachel was at Marcus's apartment, giving Emma her bottle during one of the supervised visitation hours the court allowed her. These moments were precious and heartbreaking in equal measure. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Hello? It is Chelsea. The voice was barely above a whisper. I need to meet with you. Tonight. But you cannot tell anyone. Not your lawyer, not your detective friend. No one. Rachel felt her pulse quicken. Why? Because I found something bad, and I think I am in danger. They met at a hotel outside the city, a neutral location where neither of them would be recognized. Chelsea looked terrible. She had lost more weight, and her eyes had the hollow look of someone who had not slept in days. Tell me what you found, Rachel said. Chelsea pulled out her phone with shaking hands. I started listening. After our conversation, I started paying attention to things I had ignored before. Diane's phone calls, Jonathan's late-night meetings, the way they both stopped talking whenever I entered a room. She showed Rachel a recording. I hid my phone in Diane's office. I know it was dangerous, but I had to know. The recording was muffled but audible. Diane's voice, cold and businesslike. The daughter-in-law is becoming a problem. She found the shell company records. If she connects them to the Reynolds transaction, everything unravels. Another voice, male, unfamiliar. What do you want us to do? The same thing we did with Richard. Make it look like an accident. Rachel felt ice flood her veins. They were planning to kill her. There is more, Chelsea whispered. She handed Rachel a folder. I found these in Diane's safe. She keeps records of everything. Rachel opened the folder and felt the room spin. Documents proving the money laundering, bank statements, wire transfers. But more than that, records of payments to a coroner to falsify Richard Whitmore's autopsy, evidence of bribes to judges and law enforcement, and a psychiatric facility, Meadowbrook Rest and Recovery, where Diane had been sending anyone who became inconvenient. Not just Rachel's forged records, other people, business rivals who had been committed against their will, witnesses who had been disappeared into mental institutions. My God, Rachel breathed. She has been doing this for decades. Chelsea nodded miserably. I thought I was marrying into a wealthy family. I did not know I was marrying into a criminal organization. Rachel looked at the documents in her hands. This was everything she needed. Proof of murder, proof of fraud, proof of systematic corruption. We need to get this to someone who cannot be bought, Rachel said. Federal level. Maybe even higher. I know. That is why I am giving it to you. Chelsea's voice cracked. Because I am not going to survive this. What do you mean? Diane knows. Chelsea's tears were falling now. She found out I accessed her safe. She knows I copied the documents. Jonathan told me last night that Diane wants to have a private lunch with me tomorrow to discuss our future. Rachel understood immediately. Diane was going to kill Chelsea. Then we go to the authorities tonight, Rachel said. We protect you. We... Her phone buzzed. A text from Nina. Emergency. Come to the office now. They know about the investigation. Rachel looked at Chelsea. Stay here, lock the door. Do not let anyone in. I will be back within an hour. Rachel, Chelsea said, grabbing her arm. If something happens to me, make sure they pay. Make sure Emma grows up knowing the truth about her father's family. Nothing is going to happen to you. We are going to end this. But even as she said the words, Rachel felt the cold certainty of fear settling into her bones. Something had gone very wrong. The state attorney's office was in chaos when Rachel arrived. Nina met her at the door, her face ashen. We have been compromised. How? Our supervisor. He was on Whitmore's payroll the entire time. He fed them everything about our investigation. Rachel felt the ground shift beneath her feet. So they know what evidence we have. They know our strategy. It is worse than that. Nina's voice was flat. There is a warrant out for your arrest. For what? Theft of proprietary business documents, computer fraud, harassment. They are claiming you hacked into Whitmore Holdings and stole confidential information. I did not hack anything. Everything I gathered was from public records. I know, but they have judges who owe them favors. Nina grabbed Rachel's arm. You need to disappear. Right now. Wait. Chelsea gave me something. Evidence of murder. Proof that Diane killed Jonathan's father. Nina's eyes widened. Where is this evidence? Rachel reached into her bag. The folder was gone. No. No. Rachel dumped out her entire bag. Phone, wallet, keys. No folder. She copied them, Rachel realized, horror flooding through her. Chelsea made copies for herself. She must have taken the originals back while I was not looking. Why would she do that? Because she was never on my side. Rachel's voice was hollow. She was working for Diane the whole time, getting me to reveal our evidence so they could destroy it. The trap had been perfect, and Rachel had walked right into it. The arrest happened at Marcus's apartment. Rachel had gone back to see Emma one last time before going into hiding. She had 10 minutes with her daughter. 10 precious minutes of holding that tiny body, memorizing the weight of her, the smell of her, the sound of her breathing. Then the police kicked down the door. Rachel Morgan, you are under arrest. They handcuffed her in the living room while Lily screamed and Marcus shouted and Emma wailed in her crib. Auntie Rachel! Lily's voice was hysterical. Why are they taking Auntie Rachel? It is okay, honey, Rachel said, even as they pulled her toward the door. It is going to be okay. But it was not okay. Nothing was okay. The holding cell was cold and gray and smelled like despair. Rachel sat on a metal bench, staring at the concrete floor, trying to process the complete destruction of everything she had built. Chelsea had betrayed her. The evidence was gone. Nina's investigation was shut down, and now Rachel was facing federal charges that could put her in prison for years. Emma would grow up without her mother. The Whitmores had won. A guard appeared at the cell door. "Morgan, bail has been posted." Rachel looked up, confused. "Who?" She walked out of the holding area to find Chelsea waiting in the lobby. Rachel felt rage surge through her body. She lunged forward, and only the guard's quick reflexes stopped her from attacking the woman who had destroyed her life. "Easy," the guard warned. Chelsea did not flinch. She stood there, calm and composed, watching Rachel with an expression that was impossible to read. "Come with me," Chelsea said. "We need to talk." "Talk?" Rachel's voice was raw with fury. "You set me up. You were working for Diane the whole time." "No." Chelsea's voice was soft but steady. "I was working for myself, and I have approximately 6 hours before Diane realizes what I have actually done." "What are you talking about?" Chelsea leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The documents I took from your bag, they were copies. The originals are already in the hands of a federal prosecutor in Washington, someone Diane cannot reach." Rachel stared at her. "I needed them to think they had won," Chelsea continued. "I needed Diane to believe I was loyal so she would give me access to the rest of her secrets. The murder evidence was just the beginning, Rachel. There is so much more. Why should I believe you? Because I just paid your bail with money I embezzled from Diane's accounts." Chelsea smiled grimly. "In about 6 hours, she is going to figure out that $3 million is missing and that I am the one who took it. At that point, she is going to try to kill me. So, I am very motivated to make sure she goes to prison first." Rachel tried to process this reversal. "You have been playing her this whole time?" "I have been playing everyone this whole time." Chelsea's expression flickered with something like shame. "I was not a good person when I met Jonathan. I knew he was married. I did not care. I wanted the money, the status, the life. But then I started seeing who these people really are, what they are capable of. The murder of Jonathan's father. That was the beginning. But there is more. So much more. Diane has been destroying people for decades. Business rivals, former employees, anyone who became inconvenient. She has records of all of it because she is arrogant enough to keep trophies. And you have these records? I have copies of everything. Bank statements, wire transfers, murder for hire, payments. Enough to put her away for life. Then why did you not just give them to the police?" "Because the police in this state are compromised. I needed someone federal, someone outside Diane's reach. And I needed to make sure I had leverage to protect myself when this all came out." Rachel studied Chelsea, looking for deception and finding only exhaustion and determination. "If this is true," Rachel said slowly, "if you really have evidence that can bring them down, why did you bail me out? What do you need from me?" Chelsea met her eyes. "Because I cannot do this alone. I have the evidence, but I do not know how to present it. I do not know how to make a case. You are a forensic accountant. You know how to take financial data and turn it into a story that prosecutors can understand. And because you are the only person who hates Diane as much as I do." Chelsea's voice hardened. "She took your daughter. She tried to destroy your life. She was going to have me killed. We have both been her victims. Now we are going to be her executioners." Rachel thought about Emma, about the months of fighting and losing, about the moments of hope that had been crushed again and again. She thought about the garbage bag on Christmas Eve, about standing in the snow with nothing, She thought about everything she had lost and everything she still had to fight for. "When do we start?" Rachel asked. "Right now," Chelsea said. "The Whitmore Foundation Gala is in 3 days. 500 of Boston's most influential people will be there to honor Diane's philanthropy. It is the perfect stage." The perfect stage for what? For the end. The Whitmore Foundation Gala was exactly as magnificent as Diane had intended. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow light across 500 guests, dressed in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. An orchestra played classical music while waiters circulated with champagne. The venue, a historic ballroom overlooking the city, had been transformed into a showcase of wealth and taste. Diana Whitmore stood at the center of it all, radiant in silver silk, accepting congratulations on her impending appointment as chair of the Children's Hospital Board. She smiled graciously, laughed warmly, played the role of philanthropist and society queen with the skill of someone who had been practicing for decades. She had no idea what was coming. Rachel entered through the service entrance, Rahul wearing a caterer's uniform. For 3 years, she had been invisible in this world, the wife who did not belong, the outsider who would never fit in. Now she used that invisibility as a weapon. She moved through the crowd unseen, just another member of the help. Chelsea was already inside, playing her role. She stood beside Jonathan, the perfect trophy wife, laughing at jokes and making small talk with donors. But her eyes tracked Rachel's movement through the room. The signal came at exactly 9 o'clock. Chelsea leaned over to whisper something to Jonathan. He frowned, then excused himself to take a phone call. For 60 seconds, Diane would be alone. Rachel moved. She reached the podium just as Diane was preparing to make her speech about family values and charitable giving. The irony was almost too perfect. "Good evening, everyone," Rachel said into the microphone, her voice calm and clear. The room fell silent. Heads turned. Recognition rippled through the crowd. "Security," Diane said sharply. "Remove this woman immediately." "Before they throw me out," Rachel continued, "your donors might want to see something." She connected a flash drive to the presentation system. The screens flanking the stage flickered, then displayed a photograph. Richard Whitmore, Diane's husband, dead 12 years. "This man was murdered," Rachel said, "by the woman you are honoring tonight." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Diane's composure cracked, just slightly. "This is absurd," Diane said, forcing a laugh. "This woman is my son's mentally unstable ex-wife. She has been harassing our family for months." Security. Guards moved toward the stage. Rachel had seconds. She clicked to the next slide. Bank records. A payment of $200,000 to a mechanic who specialized in making car accidents look real. "This is the payment for cutting Richard Whitmore's brake lines." Rachel's voice carried across the silent ballroom. "Made 2 weeks before his death." Another click. Coroner's reports, side by side. The official document and a second version, with handwritten notes showing the changes that had been made. "This is the falsified autopsy. The original shows evidence of brake tampering. The version filed with the court was altered. Here's the payment to the coroner who made those changes." Diane's face had gone white. "Stop this. Stop this right now." But Rachel was not finished. She clicked through more documents. Shell companies, wire transfers, evidence of decades of fraud and money laundering. "And this," Rachel said, her voice hardening, "this is the psychiatric facility where Diane sends people who become inconvenient, including fake records she created to try to take my daughter away from me." The final slide showed the forged psychiatric documents with metadata proving they had been created 3 months ago, not 3 years ago as claimed. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Donors backed away from Diane as if she were contagious. Camera phones captured everything. Then the doors opened, and federal agents walked in. Nina Flores led them, followed by a team from the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. They had been waiting outside, ready to move, once Rachel provided the public spectacle that would make the arrest impossible to suppress. "Diane Whitmore," Nina said, "you are under arrest for murder, fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy." Diane turned to Jonathan, who had reappeared in the doorway. "Do something," she hissed. "Call our lawyers. Fix this." Jonathan looked at his mother, then at Rachel, then at Chelsea, who had moved to stand beside Rachel. Something in his expression shifted. The fear that had controlled him for 12 years finally broke. "No," Jonathan said quietly. "It is over, Mom. You pathetic coward." Diane's voice rose to a shriek. "After everything I did for you, everything I sacrificed, you killed my father," Jonathan said. The words came out flat, hollow, the voice of a man who had been carrying an unbearable weight for far too long. "I have known for years. I was too scared to do anything about it. But I am done being scared." The agents handcuffed Diane in front of 500 witnesses. She screamed threats and promises of revenge as they led her away, her carefully constructed image of grace and philanthropy shattered beyond repair. Rachel watched her go, feeling nothing like the triumph she had expected, just exhaustion, and the first stirrings of peace. Jonathan approached her slowly. He looked like a man who had aged decades in the span of an hour. "I am sorry," he said, "for everything. The Christmas dinner, the custody battle, all of it." Rachel studied her ex-husband, the man she had loved once, the man who had destroyed her life. "I know," she said, "and someday, maybe I will forgive you, but not today." What about Emma? Rachel thought about her daughter, about all the months of fighting to be in her life. Emma deserves to know her father, but she also deserves a father who is not controlled by fear. If you are ready to be that person, really ready, we can talk about custody arrangements. But if you are going to fall back into old patterns, stay away. Jonathan nodded slowly. "I am going to cooperate with the investigation. Everything I know about my mother's business, I am going to tell them." "Good. It is the least you can do." She walked away without looking back. Chelsea was waiting outside, wrapped in a coat against the cold night air. "It is done," Chelsea said. "It is done," Rachel agreed. They stood in silence for a moment, two women who had been enemies and had become something like allies. "What happens now?" Chelsea asked. "Now we go home." Rachel smiled for the first time in what felt like months. "Tomorrow, I get my daughter back." 6 months later, Rachel sat in her new apartment, watching Emma crawl across the floor toward a tower of blocks Marcus had built. The apartment was small but perfect, filled with light and toys and the chaos of a life being rebuilt. Betty stopped by every week, her wheelchair rolling across the hardwood floors while she offered unsolicited legal advice and demanded updates on Emma's development. Lily visited constantly, having appointed herself Emma's official best friend and protector. And Rachel was working again, not at her old firm, but with Nina's task force, helping investigate financial crimes and bring down people like the Whitmores. It turned out that destroying one criminal empire qualified her for a career in destroying others. Marcus appeared in the doorway holding a letter. "This came for you. Looks official." Rachel took the envelope. "Return address, Federal Correctional Institution." Inside was a single page, Diane's handwriting. "Did you really think I built a $200 million empire by keeping all my secrets in one location? The evidence that destroyed me was barely 10% of what I know. The other 90% is insurance, hidden where no one will find it, unless, of course, something happens to me, in which case it all becomes public. Including the file I have on you, Rachel, Everyone has secrets, even forensic accountants. I wonder what the FBI would think about certain tax restructuring you helped with during your first year at Price and Morgan. Sweet dreams. D. Rachel. Rachel read the letter twice, her hand steady. Then she folded it carefully and looked at Marcus. Bad news, he asked. She thought about her past, about the mistakes she had made when she was young and ambitious and willing to cut corners, about the fear that had controlled her for so long. No, she said, just noise. She walked to the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Diane thought she could still control Rachel with fear, that threats about past mistakes would send her running. But Rachel had already lost everything once. She had been thrown out with a garbage bag on Christmas Eve. She had nearly frozen to death. She had watched her daughter taken from her arms. You could only hit rock bottom once. After that, you were not scared anymore. You were free. Emma crawled over and grabbed Rachel's leg, pulling herself up to standing. "Mama," she said, her first word, "Mama." Rachel picked up her daughter and held her close. "That is right, baby girl. I am your mama, and I am never going to let anyone make you feel small." She thought about everything she had lost and everything she had gained, the career she had given up and the new purpose she had found, the marriage that had been a trap and the family she had built from the ashes. Her mother had been right all those years ago. You do not find yourself by having someone complete you. You find yourself by surviving the worst and choosing to keep going. Rachel had survived. And now she was going to thrive. Whatever came next, she would face it. Not because she was not afraid, but because she had learned that fear was just another obstacle to overcome. The woman who had been thrown out with a garbage bag was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who would never again give up her power for the illusion of love. Rachel smiled at her daughter. "Let us go make dinner," she said. "Your uncle is cooking, which means we need to supervise, or we will be eating burnt grilled cheese again." She carried Emma toward the kitchen, toward the sound of Marcus arguing with a smoke detector and Lily's laughter echoing through the apartment, toward the messy, imperfect, beautiful life she had built from nothing. This was not the ending she had imagined on that snowy Christmas Eve. It was better. It was real. And it was hers. Now, before we dive in, I need to ask you something. Do you know someone who needs to hear this story? Someone going through a difficult time? Someone who feels invisible or forgotten? Share this with them. Sometimes a single story can change everything. And if this is your first time here, welcome to the family. That subscribe button and notification bell mean you will never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment below telling me where you are watching from. I read every single comment, and I love knowing our community stretches across the entire world. If you have been here before, thank you for coming back. Your support means everything. Now, let us get into Rachel's story. Thank you for staying until the end. Stories like Rachel's remind us that no matter how dark things get, there is always a path forward. Remember, the people who underestimate you are giving you your greatest advantage. Use it wisely. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Take care of yourself. And never forget, you are stronger than you think. Content, credit, statement. This content has been carefully researched, developed, plus, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted with intention, designed not just to entertain, but to inspire, educate, and empower our viewers. We believe that stories have the power to change lives. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.